I'm chasing the clouds and the wind. The blowing never ends. I'm chasing everything. I'm walking this road up ahead. Snowflakes on my chin. I'm moving all the time. Sometimes it feels like it's all uphill. Don't even know how to stand still. Each step a million miles to there. Someday I know that the sun will shine through. I'll reach the moon, make it up to you. Seems I have this thought every day. I'm chasing the clouds and the wind. The blowing never ends. I'm chasing everything. I'm walking this road up ahead. Snowflakes on my chin. I'm moving all the time.
When it comes to fruit trees, you want them to produce fruit. And this apple tree last year produced fruit. But just because a fruit tree produces fruit doesn't mean that it's bearing the full amount of fruit that it can. And that's where pruning comes into place. Pruning can take a variety of forms. The most obvious way to do it is to cut back the branches in a particular way. Another way that you prune a fruit tree is to thin the amount of fruit that it produces. Most trees produce far more fruit than they can, in a healthy way, carry throughout the season. And so you end up with lots of drops from the tree, or fruit that doesn't reach its potential in size, or you may even end up with fruit that has all kinds of scabs and disease on it. These branches are way too thick. They keep the sunlight out, which prevents the leaves from transferring sunlight into energy. That limits the fruiting. It also creates a scenario in which it's difficult for air to circulate between the branches, and this becomes a breeding ground for fungus and disease. So let's get to pruning, at least the branches today. There's a principle in our lives that oftentimes we apply, and it's this. If a little bit of something is good, well then a lot of something is far better. We do this in all kinds of areas of our lives. We do it with medications that we take. You know, we have a headache and the bottle tells us to take one, but we take 2 or 3. It happens in our jobs when we're working. You know, instead of working what we need to do and accomplishing the tasks that are necessary, we do more and more and more and more, eventually becoming workaholics. We do this in the ways that we spend our free time, where we focus on perhaps it's electronics or some kind of hobby that we have. A little bit of it's good, but we keep piling on more and more, and suddenly our lives are consumed by this thing. It's amazing, but we see that pruning is actually a biblical concept. In fact, Jesus talks about pruning in our lives. Right before his death, he's out in a vineyard where grapes are grown. And he uses an incredible illustration to describe to the disciples how they are supposed to continue on in the relationship with God. And there Jesus says that I am the vine and you are the branches. Remain in me and I will remain in you. That is, we have to stay attached to the main trunk if we're going to bear fruit. But he also says this. He says that all the branches that bear fruit need to be pruned as well. That's because then they'll be able to produce even more fruit. In our lives, we're called to bear fruit. And we're to do this for the glory of God. This word, which is translated pruning or prune in the Bible, quoted by Jesus, actually has a very colorful meaning. It means to purge or purify something. And that should give us a nuance as to what Jesus was getting at when he spoke this to his disciples and to us today. There are a number of ways that our lives need pruning. The first one's this: to get rid of all of the junk in our life that bogs us down and pulls us away from God. On an apple tree, there's a lot of dead wood usually, especially on older trees like this one. And the old wood has to be removed. The diseased wood has to be taken out, otherwise it infects the other branches. In the Bible, this is called sin. Sin needs to be removed from our lives so that we can be in proper relationship with God. Another pruning that needs to take place is to take out the competition that is competing for our allegiance, our time, our focus, our energy. And a lot of times you find around a fruit tree like this, vines that are growing up and strangling branches, actually pulling branches down, briars and other weeds that are growing along the ground that are taking up nutrients. These need to be pulled out and removed so that a tree can flourish and that it can bear the most fruit possible. Sometimes the pruning that needs to take place in our lives is actually taking things that are good. They're not inherently sinful or bad, but they're not what we're being called to do at that time in our lives. And maybe in the church that we're a part of or the community that we're in, someone else is far better at doing what we're trying to do, and we need to let go of those things. We see that in apple trees all the time where branches cross over one another, and in the worst case scenarios they actually rub against each other, and this friction causes all kinds of problems because there are openings that are created for disease to grow in trees, and neither of them flourish. Neither of these branches flourish because there's repetition. And so these need to be taken out of our lives so that we can produce the best kind of fruit, the exact thing that God is telling us to be about in our lives. One more way that we need to prune our lives is just like what we see at the tops of most apple trees. Vigorous growth. It's real fast, vertical growth usually. And it needs to be removed because it zaps energy from the tree and limits its ability to produce good fruit. This happens in our lives when we have these things in our lives that pop up all the time. They usually are reactionary things, and we have this knee-jerk reaction to them where we have to do something about it. Even though it has no great priority in our life, we feel like we've got to do something about it right away. We have to get the task done. We have to be able to get it off our to-do list. And these things limit us from being able to accomplish the big picture ideas and goals that God has for our lives. It's not that we don't have to at times put our energy into those immediate concerns. Sometimes they're dire and very important. But so often we react to the things around us in such a way that they actually control us. And so we need to prune them out. And there you go, we've opened up this tree. Now sunlight can come down and create energy in the leaves to provide nutrients for the apples. And there's air that'll be able to circulate to keep the disease away. But as you might guess, this tree will need to be pruned again every single year if it's supposed to maximize its fruit bearing capacity. And our lives are no different. We constantly need pruning in our lives. Today the challenge is for us to be honest and real about what needs purifying, taken away, pruned out of our lives so that we can live more wholeheartedly for Jesus Christ. This word which is translated some things that compete with Christ in our lives are bigger than others. This is one part of a multiflora rose. The Greek word that is translated pruning in the Bible, in this passage that Jesus is quoted in, actually means to purify or purge.